During the Spurs Thunder Christmas Day matchup, Lou Dort slid his leg into Victor Wembanyama's leg, causing him to fall to the ground. This was an extremely dangerous play, and nothing has come of it. No suspension, not even a statement from the NBA. Lou Dort completely gets away with this. There's no deterrent to make him think about committing this type of act moving forward. And we had the real risk of Victor Wembanyama being out for the season. And if you're the NBA, just purely from a money standpoint, you cannot have your stars missing extended time because of an unnecessary risk. Lou Dort, a role player, just introduced the real risk that you have the face of your league, the future of your league, possibly the greatest player of all time, go out for an extended period of time. And this could have affected his career moving forward. And just because he didn't get injured doesn't mean nothing should happen to Lou Dort. I have to think that if Victor was out for several weeks, then we would see some type of action for the NBA. But that shouldn't be what prompts the NBA to act. It's the act itself. It's the fact that Lou Dort intentionally or recklessly put Victor Wembanyama in a position to get seriously injured. You can't let this go. I don't understand what the NBA is doing other than just pure cowardice on the part of the front office, right? But what are you afraid of? Why can't you act on this? Why do you let this player affect your league? This should be the case for any player, but especially when you have a guy that's going to change how the NBA is played, right? When you have the future of the NBA, his playing career is at stake. This is unacceptable, and the NBA stayed completely silent on this. It's it's somewhat surprising. It's not all the way surprising though. We've seen the NBA, right? Like just continuously fail with its decision making. Here, it's not a matter of whether Victor is injured. It's a matter of another player is putting another player at risk of injury intentionally or recklessly. There is no place for this in the game. We actually have a change.org petition. Someone wrote that there needs to be a place for signatures. I created a change.org petition. To date, it has 51 signatures. But of course, this happened on Christmas Day. It doesn't stay at the top of everyone's minds, but this is a real problem. And it's going to result ultimately if you have players who are engaged in real dirty play. I'm not talking about the dirty play where you're annoying another player, but the dirty play where someone can actually get injured from you playing like this, then there will be a significant injury. So the time to act is now. And we've already seen this in the past. We saw this with Zaza, Pachulia, and Kawhi Leonard. It's happening again. This time there wasn't an injury, but you have to take action to ensure that players aren't posing a serious risk of injury to other players. So this was extremely bad. I wasn't the only one talking about it. It got a lot of traction on Reddit. And I searched for Lou Dort suspension just to make sure that he wasn't actually suspended. And then up comes a Reddit thread where someone wrote Lou Dort needs to be suspended for the rest of the season. And there's even a poll like when has 132 votes. People agree something needed to happen. 48% of the respondents said that Victor or what's his name, Lou Dort should be suspended 25 plus games. 27% said 15 games. 13% said 5, and only 12% of people wrote 0 games. Something needed to come of this. The NBA needed to take some type of hardline stance against this type of play. Physical play is fine. Other than intentionally putting another player at risk. And we'll add in recklessly in case you want to argue that it wasn't intentional. But if another player is posing this type of risk to anybody in the NBA, this should be the case. Should not be permissible whatsoever. But here we know we don't even have a deterrent. Lou Dort completely gets away with this. And I wanted to cover this first. We've got 9 tiles on the big board for today's New Year's podcast. And the next topic is yet another failure on the part of the NBA and something that's gone quiet. So similar theme here, the Clippers scandal. Remember, aspiration, in case you haven't heard, because the media doesn't cover this. They really didn't want to cover it when it was an enormous story. But now this has really gone quiet. The NBA delay game tactic has held true. But I do expect an announcement soon because we know the All-Star game is in February. So something is coming either before or after the All-Star game. But even thinking about the investigation, what could possibly take this long? It's not that hard to get to the bottom of this. But we do see the delay game, right, on full display here. And we have the NBA's preferred law firm conducting this investigation. This is Wachtell and Lipton. And one question I have is, will they actually release the report? Because the report it very much puts the law firm's reputation at stake. And if the law firm comes back and says that there was no wrongdoing, there was no circumventing the salary cap, no one's going to believe it. Now, we can't know for absolute certain, right? Not 100%, but everybody's seen Pablo's reporting. And we've also seen some of the response coming from the Clippers and the NBA. And there's been nothing put forward that suggests that there was no salary cap circumvention. We've had denials, but there's nothing that has suggested that Pablo Torre's reporting is wrong. And so now I'm very curious as to if they will actually issue this law firm's report, because that to me would be interesting. But we might see that bottled, and we might see the NBA come out with a front. Just nothing really happened here. Maybe what happens is sometimes the league will offer a something. It will offer. It's like a token suspension or a token punishment. So for the Clippers, it might be said that, well, we can't find that the Clippers actually did anything wrong, but we just don't like these circumstances. So because we don't like these circumstances, then we'll get some type of token punishment. But the Clippers scandal has really been flattened. And that's especially, of course, the mainstream media has really helped with this because they are not covering it. Now, this is understandable to a large extent because there is no new news. It really was dependent on Pablo Torre reporting on this continuously. I think Pablo Torre has run dry on this. So we haven't seen anything come lately, but there will be an announcement soon. And of course, there'll be discussion around this. But my thinking is that we'll get the token punishment, but I don't think we'll actually get the real punishment. The NBA looked like they had no interest in making this into any more than the story it was. They really wanted to let this one go. And so the Clippers scandal is something I also wanted to cover just because I think about it from time to time. And I think that this story is such an enormous story, but here's another failure on the part of the NBA. You have to have a standard. If you don't have a standard, then you don't really have a real league, like a legitimate league. Otherwise, you just have the World Wrestling Federation. I know it as federation because that's it was the WWF when I knew it. But you just have this you have this continual show. It's just a show. It's only entertainment. It's not actually sport. When you have sport, there's legitimacy to it. There needs to be legitimacy. And when you have teams circumventing the salary cap, that is illegitimacy, right? We need to see rules and policy. We need to see those rules upheld. And so the Clippers scandal is something that is still of interest. It's just there's not been any updates or any news, but I do think there will be news forthcoming. So we've covered that. And then Netflix. One other thing I forgot to add on my Netflix video is that when you make your video exclusive to Netflix, then you lose out on the YouTube comments, I have 15% of the fun, sometimes even more than that. YouTube comments are important. They add real value. And this actually leads to another topic I might cover is that I think YouTube comments should actually be monetized because commenters are content creators too. And but going back to Netflix, if you take the Bill Simmons podcast, the Ryan Russillo podcast, interesting, by the way, that we just had Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo divorced from one another completely, not even talk about each other. And then now they're both joining Netflix at the same time. But if you have these podcasts and there are no comments, that takes away from some of the podcasts. Now, some people listen to the audio format, so they're not getting the podcast anyway, or the comments anyway. But for those on YouTube, which is quite significant, there are no comments, so that takes away from some of the fun. So that's yet another reason I don't like moving to Netflix. I have to think they got so much money for doing this, because to sacrifice YouTube is a big sacrifice. But I did cover this. There's a 20-minute there's a 20-minute video on this. I'll link to that in the description. But I think this is a really interesting shift that you don't see covered a lot. And the next title, Knicks might be champions. So I think the Knicks could very well beat the Spurs. In fact, this will lead to my next title. But the Spurs desperately need shooting. They need consistent shooting. And right now they're having a real problem with that. And the Knicks can beat the Spurs. This is not a mismatch. And I think this is actually favoring the Knicks. I think then if the Spurs do the Knicks a favor and take out the Thunder, which we see the Spurs are a really bad matchup for the Thunder, and I'm not saying that's a given. The Thunder could beat the Spurs in a playoff series, but right now we know that the Spurs have the potential. This is definitely not a given that the Thunder will win. The Spurs can very well beat the Thunder. And so if the Spurs take out the Thunder and then the Knicks match up with the Spurs, assuming the Knicks can get past the Pistons and any other teams that become formidable, but it looks to me like it's going to be the Knicks. If the Knicks can advance and the Spurs advance, then the Knicks might be NBA champions. And when I talk about shooting, let's actually go. I should have this pulled up. Spurs Knicks. Nope, that's not it. Okay, so here it is. So the Spurs are having trouble with consistency from 3-point range. And here we have an article from airalamo.com talks about the last 10 games. We see this on display. If you wonder why the Spurs lost to the Cavs, it's because they couldn't hit any threes. I think they were something like 7 of 31. But in this article, it talks about the last 10 games. Harrison Barnes shooting 33%, and Harrison Barnes started out on fire. The Spurs color commentator was actually Sean Elliott. He's actually been calling Harrison Barnes Mr. 100%. That's gone. Julian Champagnie is only hitting 30%. Last night, we saw him erupt against the Knicks. And then Devin Vassell is also shooting 33%. And when we look at the Spurs and we look at their 3-point percentage, we can see Keldon Johnson having a career year. Harrison Barnes still at 39.4%. He has been shooting really well. But we also see him disappear at times. De'Aaron Fox shooting really well. Devin Vassell still at a high clip at 37.9%. But then we have Victor at 34.9%. So this is where you want to see Victor taking less threes. He can definitely hit them, but he's not as good of a shooter. So I'd like to see better selection on when he takes them. If he can start to figure out when he makes them more often versus when he's just chunking up another three, I'd like to see this percentage go up. Because if he's taking a three, he's not taking a 2-pointer. He's not near the basket. I'd like to see him get more of his buckets, even more of an emphasis than he already has on getting layups and dunks versus 3-pointers. And then we see Julian Champagnie at 34.6%. Julian Champagnie is supposed to be the Spurs shooter. And last night we saw him come through and he beat the Knicks. He's the one that won this game. But 34.6%, and we see him miss too many open shots. One thing to keep in mind about the Spurs 3-pointers is they're usually open. Sometimes they're contested, right? But the Spurs get a lot of open looks, in large part thanks to Victor. And so when you see these lower shooting percentages, then you have really inefficiency, and we need to see them step up and make these threes. Also, look at Stephon Castle, 27.4%. Look at Dylan Harper, 25.9%. Dylan Harper shooting better of late. Stephon Castle really needs to improve his 3-point shooting along with his turnovers. If that can go up, then the Spurs can more easily win some of these games. But right now, if you're game planning and you're smart about your game planning, and the Spurs have an off night, or the Spurs they're very streaky. They're almost definitionally streaky, especially when it comes to Champagnie and Devin Vassell. So we need more consistency out of the Spurs. This has been a real problem for them. And if you're asking, how are they losing some of these games? Sometimes it's just that they simply aren't making wide open threes, but this is their makeup. They're not a good shooting team, or they're maybe a mediocre shooting team, but they're getting so many open looks. They need to make more of them. But this is why the Knicks have a real chance. Not only this, the experience factor, the physicality. The Spurs don't match up well with physical teams, and so yeah, I think the Knicks, if they match up with the Spurs, even though we saw the Spurs win last night, but I mean, it took a 11 of 17 game from Julian Champagnie. That has not happened all season, so you can't rely upon that. The Knicks still played them really close, and we saw the Knicks come back in the NBA Cup. So it's not like it's a given that I think the Knicks will win, but I think the Knicks would have the edge if I was looking at the Spurs and Knicks in the playoffs. And this all leads to the next point, which is League Pass. I have the Spurs on League Pass. And last night, the Spurs played the Knicks, marquee matchup. Definitely wanted to watch this. And I find out the game is on NBA TV, which is not a part of League Pass, which is that to me is a problem in and of itself. If you're going to have NBA, if you're going to have League Pass, and then on your flagship league TV channel, you can't even get the game on League Pass. That to me isn't. I don't understand that division doesn't make a lot of sense for someone who's paying for a subscription. But that being said, if we look at the NBA's own terms, we have full game replays, and we can see that if you have League Pass and there is a game on NBA TV, then you're supposed to be able to watch that. So in the US, due to blackout conditions, full games for games on national TV will be available at 6 a.m. Eastern time the following day, and local channels, local TV networks will be available 72 hours after the game. Well, that was not the case, and I actually have a screenshot of this. We see the game I have a game recap for the Spurs and the Knicks, and this is past 6 a.m., but there's no game replay. And so here, national TV game, we have the on NBA TV, I'm assuming, but it's not. I can't watch it. And so to me, these are your own terms and conditions that you have set, and you can watch it. So there could be some exception I don't know about with the NBA TV, but I was not able to watch the Knicks and the Spurs, and I actually waited to watch the replay, and I could not watch it. So otherwise, NBA League Pass has been, I think it's worked out well on Amazon. I go through Amazon because Amazon ads, just to make sure we have a more fair experience. I don't have to deal directly with the NBA. With Amazon, if there's a problem, I can go directly to them. And but 6 a.m. no show, so I missed the Knicks game. I had to settle for the highlights, but I also talked to a friend, and he said that this was the Julian Champagny game. Like, if there's no Julian Champagny, there's no Spurs win. So that was, I mean, you'll obviously they all count, right? If a player, we saw Miles Bridges last year on the Christmas Day game, he scores however many he scored. Was it 40, 45? So sometimes you just have these outbursts and they all count towards your wins, but nobody in San Antonio is relying upon Julian Champagny to hit that many threes. This card is actually a carryover. I missed that card. Polls. So we do have a few polls from the channel, and then let's look at one. So if you were the Lakers, what would you do with LeBron if none of the options fit? What would you do as GM in the comments? And we have several comments. But what was interesting is 42% of the respondents, and there were 53 votes, 42% of people said waive him. We're actually better with him gone. 28% said trade him if possible. And then 21% said play out the season, don't re-sign him. I forgot to add the hyphen there. And then suspend him was at 9%. So I get the distinct impression when I look through comments from Lakers fans, when I see different activity, discussion from Lakers Nation, I get the distinct impression that they cannot stand LeBron James. And I think this is the next tile here. Yeah, LeBron James, Lakers Nation can't stand him. And someone on the comments actually mentioned something I was thinking about, that LeBron really needs his Miami trip. I don't know if this is an annual tradition at this point, but we all remember when LeBron had his Miami trip, he came back revitalized. So he needs his rest and relaxation Miami trip. And so not having LeBron in the All-Star game could actually help LeBron if he's able to get down Miami and recover from the season. But he's had, he's been a real problem for the Lakers. And we've on this channel, we've covered him not going back on defense. Of course, Luka does that as well. But then we also have LeBron ignoring JJ Redick, undermining JJ Redick. It's just a bad state. It's a bad state of being. And I think once LeBron is off the team, then it will be, at least then you can move forward and you don't have to do anything with it. Do anything with him. I can't see him coming back to the Lakers. And he has played decently. When you look at his stats, he is putting up decent stats in this last run of games. But he had a bad game against the Pistons. He played ragged against the Pistons, and you can see the decline. The decline is here, right? We've seen him able to stave off a significant decline for a long time. Of course, his defense has been gone for a long time, but offensively, we've seen that production. We've seen the 25-point standard upheld. That's not going to be the case this season. There has been a sharp decline, and but he can still get his stats for the season. The Lakers can still make the playoffs. The Lakers, though, they're going to be better off with him gone. And a lot of the Laker fans, I think, are ready for him to be gone. And so what will be very interesting is next season, where will he go? I can't see him retiring. He loves the power of being in the NBA, and that's where his power is tied. So once he's gone, that's not going to be there. So I think he's going to hold on as long as he can. I don't see him retiring after this season, so it'll be interesting to see where he's going. But I do not think it will be in LA. And we have one other poll, and this was on the Netflix. This was on Lou Dort, and then we also have Netflix. Yeah, so this has 22 votes. This has only been up 16 hours ago. But will you watch a sports podcast on Netflix in 2026? And 64% said no, 14% said maybe, 23% said yes. And I think I should have worded this better, because I think there might be some initial interest just to see what it is. So maybe you watch a podcast just to see what's going on with Netflix, see if there's anything new, anything different. I think Bill Simmons has timed his first podcast with Netflix to go really well. It'll be at the end of an NFL playoff run. They'll be live. So I think that's a good start. So you might watch one, but consistently watching podcasts on Netflix doesn't make a lot of sense. But of course, Netflix is trying this out. But that was the other poll. And then the last tile on here is 65 games. So we've seen Nikola Jokic. He might not make the cutoff. He might be out. They said at least a month. And if you look at that month, right at the end of it, I think it's the game before the month ends is where his cutoff would be, because he hasn't missed a game to date. But he very well might not be eligible to win the MVP. And if you can't play 65 games, to me, you're out, whether it's through bad luck or you're just rationing your games out so that you don't strain players, whatever it is. We see this. I think we see this with the Spurs a lot. I don't think the players are actually injured to the point where they couldn't come back. I think the Spurs just hold players out because they're always trying to be, the quote unquote abundance of caution. I dislike that from the Spurs. That's one thing I dislike. I think they're way too cautious about injuries, because you can always say, well, we're so cautious and that's what we need to be, and this way we make sure to protect the players. But at a certain point, you just have to play the game. Like if you're good to go, like play the game. maybe even manage minutes, but don't sit players out when they're ready to come back. And I think that's what you see from the Spurs. Sean Elliott, who is the once again, he's the color commentator, and he said there was a player that was injured. I can't forget who it was, but he was hurt during the game. But he wasn't hurt to where you need to be out. It was just like, you're in pain, have a timeout, come back when you're feeling better. And Sean Elliott said, just rub some dirt on it. That's what we used to do. And I think that's the type of mindset you need to see more of. And I think less from the Spurs, not less from the Spurs in that mindset, but less of the doctors taking over. Because what are the doctors going to do? They're always going to doctor. They're always going to say we needed to sit out because you could potentially get injured, because they don't want it to ever come back to them. Well, it's like, you told us they were ready to play and they weren't really ready to play. But what we need is a doctor to be able to say, hey, look, like, yes, you might still be in pain, but you're good to go. Like, you can still go play. And I think what the Spurs do is a lot of times they'll hide behind the doctor. So you even see this with Mitch Johnson, and it's out of my hands. And I can understand that to a degree. We don't want to see players being pushed, but we know the Spurs already don't push players. This isn't Brian Daboll trying to get Jackson Dart back from a concussion. The Spurs are the opposite. And so with Spurs, just going off on this tangent, more players need to play. If they're good to go, we might not even see Victor versus Indiana, even though Victor has already stated he's okay. He's probably just going to miss the game because, again, you have the cliche abundance of caution. But Victor is going to miss out on these. He's not going to be eligible for awards either, and that's because of the Spurs. The Spurs they are so overly cautious that it's to the point where players are just missing games unnecessarily. And so, but if that's the case, then that's the case, and you're not eligible for the awards. Same with Jokic. If you can't play 65, I mean, it was definitionally unfortunate injury. But if you can't make it, if you're unlucky and you get hurt, then you're out. And I think the 65 games is great. There has to be a threshold where at some point you don't count. Like, you're not counting for these awards. And so 65 games is appropriate. It's just over 79%. And I think that's perfectly fine. And it's whoever can actually make 65 games. 65 games, it's like, now this is some type of amazing hurdle. We see players that are missing games just incidentally, just not even really hurt, but just decide, well, we'll take off a game because it's a back-to-back or whatever the case is. I think less minutes would be the answer here, if anything. And we already see minutes are down. I mean, Victor Wembanyama averages maybe 30 minutes a game. There's 48 minutes in a game. So we've already seen so much pullback. And if you can't make it for that length of time, then you just don't, you shouldn't be eligible for the reward. So again, Jokic out, I'm fine with it. This could really shake up the MVP odds, like who's going to win. But I do think there's an outside chance Jokic plays. Jokic does not miss games. He didn't miss any games so far. So I think there's a chance that he comes back in time, but then he can't miss any games going forward. But Jokic is out there. He's playing games. And I think more teams need to have that mindset where unless you need to miss the game, which is understandable, right? Like, if you're injured, you're injured. But if it's just a matter of like, we're playing this game where we have to be cautious because there's a doctor that says there's somehow like a 2% chance that if you step on someone's foot, you're going to re-injure it, then you need to go out and play. So going back to Sean Elliott's, rub some dirt on it, you'll be okay, get back in there. There needs to be more of that mindset, and then there will be less players who are at the 65 game. They're right at that 65 game threshold and sweating it out. But these are the tiles for the new year. We've got some more player profiles. I recently covered Dylan Brooks, and also I'm going to be looking more into the Ringer, what's going on with Rich Paul. The story there doesn't completely add up. That Rich Paul doesn't need the Ringer to create a podcast. So why did he join the Ringer? I'll likely be looking into that. So a lot more to come in the new year, but we've just covered 8 tiles. One of the tiles is a holdover from the Dylan Brooks podcast, but that's going to do it for this episode.